Hey, Keith here. Welcome to Rebel Civics, the Rebel Civics show on Unsafe Space Network. It's an education and discussion show on the principles of government, society, and individual rights. Today, we're going to talk about money, fiat currency, and real money. The gold, the Federal Reserve. We're going to talk about Goldback, the alternate currency Goldback, the value of the dollar versus gold over time. We have a guest today, Benjamin Shaffer. He's a legal counsel and merchant services with Goldback. He's also a practicing attorney, deeply interested in the Constitution and Constitution law. We met at the Free State Project Pork Fest, where he had a booth, and I bought a bunch of Goldbacks. I spent about $100 worth there, and other places in New Hampshire. I went and bought another $100 more, so now I'm trying to use them in Florida. So, Benjamin, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Sure. And you also mentioned you used to teach high school back in the day.
I did. And, I tell you what, it's that was a tougher environment. And you got to really hand it to high school teachers, especially if they're trying to fight to teach kids a real good civics curriculum. It's not really supported. And it's a tough environment. So, yeah, I thought, what'll be a lot easier than teaching high school? Being an attorney. So I went to law school because I figured that was easier than teaching high school.
At least in most schools. I mean, I tried to teach the Constitution in the county schools in my Florida county, and it took them about 2 months, and they eventually rejected me. They said that I didn't have a law degree, so I'm not qualified to teach a 1-hour overview of the Constitution at the high school level.
Oh my goodness. And yet every high school graduate should be qualified to teach a 1-hour constitutional thing, right? If we were teaching our kids properly, every high school student should know at least 1 hour's worth of good presentations about the Constitution.
So I ended up teaching it in a homeschool collaborative a couple years. So I've been doing that on Constitution Day in a local homeschool collaborative. But no, they won't let me in the school. And they do have a class on Constitution Day. So I asked, can I come in and watch what my tax dollars are telling the kids about the Constitution? Like, no. So I'm not allowed to hear what they're telling the students. Anyway, I digress. So, but that's interesting. Teaching school. It might
all into a bunch of rebels.
Easier. I would say that if you wanted to actually teach real civics at the high school level in a government school, it's probably easier to be an attorney, go to law school, because I don't think the government schools will let you do it. And it's actually the purpose of Rebel Civics. When I first proposed this idea to Unsafe Space, this is what Rebel Civics is. If I was allowed to, I'd probably be just teaching this in high school. I wouldn't have thought of doing this, but.
There you go. Well, hey, now you're going to reach people all across the country and get them excited about freedom and constitutional law principles. So,
and real money. So I called the show "Real Money," because I think gold is actually money compared to the dollar. So, first off, let's start. Tell us all, what's a goldback for somebody that's never heard of it.
Okay, so a goldback is a type of gold money. When we say money, well, or even currency, we usually mean this stuff, right? We think, okay, this piece of paper is money. But it turns out this piece of paper is basically just a receipt. And unfortunately, this receipt expired in 1971. And so you can never redeem this receipt anymore. You used to be able to take a $20 gold note and exchange it for a $20 gold piece. And the paper money was just a receipt for gold that was held by the bank somewhere else, because, carrying around a bunch of gold is risky and expensive. So you could think of paper money as more or less like a check. But real money, of course, is something of real value, something that can be exchanged and has some kind of worth. It's not just a conceptual thing. It's something in your hand. And so what's the goldback? The goldback is a new technology in money that brings back some of the oldest concepts in money, but also fixes some problems in new ways that the ancients couldn't in their gold and silver and bronze and copper systems, right? What we've done is we've created a single metal system that, in other words, it's just gold. There's no silver component or bronze component. And created fungibility, and that means interchangeability within that system. So this is what they look like. They're very shiny.
They're gold.
Yeah.
So that's the 5 or 6 different denominations, right?
That's right. So we've got 5 different denominations here. And that's the Wyoming series. I'm actually in Wyoming right now, getting ready for the Wyoming launch. September 19th. That's the big news. September 19th is when you can get Wyoming Goldbacks. So that's the launch date in Wyoming, and I'm trying to do some prep work. So I'm here at Little America, going around the state and getting people in Wyoming excited about and prepared for that launch, so that another state will have its own free market currency.
I just want to mention that. So mine are New Hampshire Goldbacks. I got these. So it's by state too. You have different.
Right. Each state, by doing it under state laws, we're protected a bit. It's a legal strategy, more or less. They're all fully interchangeable. You know, if I was in Florida, I could trade New Hampshire Goldbacks, Utah Goldbacks, Nevada Goldbacks, or Wyoming Goldbacks. It'd all be the same. Those are the 4 states we're operating in right now. But each individual Goldback is basically just a very thin coin, right? Now, it's so thin, it's a little bit more reminiscent of paper money, right? Because both of these can fit in my wallet. I can just stick it right in my wallet, and it'll lay flat, and then I can just run around with this and pull them out and use it just like you would any other cash. You pull out your Goldbacks, and you can pay right at the cash register at hundreds of businesses with this. The difference is, instead of just being paper, these are a gold coin. They're just very, very thin. And that makes it possible for us to have a very tiny amount of gold. We're actually really proud of that. I know sometimes people will say, why do I want a Goldback? It's such a tiny amount of gold. Well, that's what's so great about it. 1 Goldback right now is worth a little less than $4. You can buy something for $4, and you can make change for things when something's only in $4 increments, whereas you can't really do that with a gold coin. Right now, the U.S. Does mint 1-ounce gold coins, half-ounce, and 10th-ounce gold coins, but even the smallest minted gold coin, the 1/10 of an ounce gold coin, usually sells for about $300. And if you can't make change for anything under $300, you're going to have a really hard time actually using that as money. And so that brings up the interesting point. Before I can really explain to you what a Goldback is and why it's so powerful, I almost have to explain to you what money is. What is money in the first place, right? We think about paper dollars. We think about these fiat currencies when we think about money, and yet that's not really what money is. Money has historically and legally, there's a definition of money is a thing which has certain attributes. And those attributes are fungibility. That means you can interchange them by denomination, like we can do here. 10 Goldbacks is worth 10 of the ones. And so if I owe you 10 Goldbacks, I can give you 2 5s, 1 10, or 10 1s. Doesn't make any difference because they're all fully interchangeable. So fungibility is one of the attributes of money. Another one of the attributes of money is it has to be durable. So let's say we were using apples as money or loaves of bread as money. It wouldn't be very durable because they're perishable. They don't last. Well, Goldbacks are durable. In fact, they're so durable that people have been asking me, how strong are they? And I've been challenging people and telling them, if they can rip this Goldback, I will give them a free Goldback. And they have tried their darndest to rip them, and they cannot do it. I have never met anybody who can rip it with their bare hands. Now, it did leave.
No, you still haven't.
That's right. I still haven't. You try all you want. You're not going to be able to do it.
I just tried. I put a little kink in it.
That's right. I've got a little kink in this one.
Because it's a mylar or something. It's a plastic, right?
Yeah. It's actually
they're very strong.
Proprietary form of polyester for those interested. And what it does is that contains the gold on the inside. So let's say you give it a good crease. You know, you're going to have a crease in your Goldback, just like you would in a paper dollar. And then it might not lay totally flat on the table, but it's very resilient. You can unbend it generally and make it flat again. All right, there we go. I flattened it out again. But the main point is that the gold is still inside this protective covering. So it doesn't matter how worn out it gets, how much you crinkle it up, how much you try to rip it. The gold is still inside. It's still a goldback. The only way you can really destroy its value is, cutting a piece off with scissors or something like that. Then it's not a whole goldback anymore. We don't know how much it is, and then it wouldn't have its full value. But they're very, very durable. They're non-perishable. So that's an important attribute of money. And another important attribute of money that the dollar doesn't really do very well is money is supposed to be a store of value and a measure of value. Well, a goldback is a good store of value and a good measure of value because it's an exact weight and purity of gold. And that has, over thousands of years, proven to be relatively stable in its value, in its actual trade value. Whereas the dollar doesn't do either of those functions very well. Now, when I say $100, $1,000, you and every listener has an idea in their head of what that means, what that's worth. $1 million, right? You have that mental picture. Here's the problem. That mental picture is almost certainly wrong because the dollar has not maintained a stable value over time. Inflation means, and it's partly its nature as a fiat currency, which basically means it's created by the command of a ruler or a decision from a body. In this case, the Federal Reserve Board helps set interest rates and does monetary supply. The government and the Federal Reserve change the monetary supply, and that changes the value of the dollars. So when I said $1 million or $1,000, you might think you know what that's worth, but you're probably wrong because it's probably worth less than you thought it was. For example, there was a house. It's really close to the office where I work. I was thinking about, hey, it'd be really convenient. I could live closer to work. My kids could walk to school from here. I thought it was a beautiful yard, but the house was really trashed, and I thought, let's find out what that costs. So I called up the realtor, and I've started asking people, what do you think that house is listed for? And the answers I've gotten have ranged from like $200,000 to $400,000 is what people have said they thought it was worth. When I asked them, but when I asked the realtor, it's listed for $1.2 million. So chances are that you might be off by an order of magnitude, maybe 3 or 4 times off when you think you know what a dollar is worth.
And it depends on when you ask the question.
It depends on when you ask the question.
Over time,
right? And that's
if you ask next year, it'll be worth a lot less.
Yeah. When I say $1 million to someone in their 60s, they picture opulence and great wealth. When I say $1 million to a millennial or Gen Z, they picture, oh my goodness, maybe you could put a down payment on a house, or oh my goodness, you might be able to survive and like have a yard or something. You know what I mean? They're not thinking gilded halls. Right? Why? Because the dollar hasn't been a stable measure of value or a stable store of value. And those are things that make money money. And so what we've tried to do with the goldback is some things that have never really fully been done before in monetary technology. Most gold, silver, and other precious metals currency systems in the past have been fraught with certain problems. There's a lot of people who love the Constitution who say we should get back to the gold standard, right? We should have real money. But the problem is even our old gold standard wasn't really as effective as we want to imagine, as we want it to be. That old gold standard was fraught with one problem that almost destroyed our currency at one point, which is how much gold versus how much silver. If I'm gonna give you one of these gold pieces and I need change in silver pieces, what's the ratio between gold and silver? That gets what's called force pegged by the government. The government says this is the rule, this is the way it is. It doesn't matter if demand changes between these two metals. We're gonna pretend that it's stable between these two metals, and this is gonna be the ratio. Well, the problem is we set a different ratio in the new world than they did in the old world. And so there were a bunch of merchants at one point who were trading gold for silver on one side of the Atlantic and then silver for gold on the other side of the Atlantic and doing it again and again and again to make money on simply exchanging gold for silver. The
only way that works is because the government is defining the exchange.
It's not
letting the market define it.
right? So we
Because
didn't want that. People ask us all the time, what about a silverback, right? And a silverback would be a powerful thing, and you're going to have to look for future announcements on the possibilities there, because a silverback would be the world's first untarnishable silver. But the goldback is its standalone monetary system. So it doesn't matter what ratios happen with the other currencies. This is a one metal system. So that solves that. Another thing is going back to those gold coins, a 1 ounce gold coin costs less than 10 tenth ounce coins. You'd think that would be interchangeable, right? You'd think that 10 tenth ounces and 1 ounce should be the exact same value because it's the same amount of gold, but it's not. The premiums are vastly different. We've eliminated that as well. The 50 goldback costs exactly 50 times as much as the 1 goldback and contains exactly 50 times as much gold. So it has that fungibility, that interchangeability. So that's another problem we solved. Another problem was the small coin problem. If you were to take 1 goldback, this amount of gold, and put it into regular coin form, it'd have to be thicker than this, right? How big around would it be once you thickened it up? Well, it'd be tiny. 1 goldback in the form of a regular, round, thicker coin would be, it's like a grain of sand. It's like a single grain of wheat, something like that. It's very small. You'd lose that. If you had a pocket full of grains of sand and each one was worth $4 or $5, can you imagine how frustrating that would be? If you've ever emptied your pockets from sand after being at the beach and you think about, oh no, catch every single one of those. Don't lose any. It would be untenable. So what we've created is a technology that is uncounterfeitable gold. And it's easy to handle, it's easy to count in a way that gold has never been able to do before in a small form. The closest that anybody's ever come is there's these teeny tiny coins in India. People still would lose them all the time, but there's these teeny tiny coins from India where they tried to make gold coins small enough you could make a regular transaction. You could buy groceries or something with it, right? And that little tiny coin that people lose all the time is actually still about 15, 20 times as much gold as 1 goldback. So I was just saying it's uncounterfeitable. That's one of the other things that's powerful. One of the biggest problems we actually have in the gold and silver market right now is counterfeits. People bring in gold and silver coins to us fairly often. And it's surprising how often we find a counterfeit amongst the real ones.
Coins are much easier to counterfeit.
They're very easy to counterfeit.
Hard to counterfeit.
People think, well, how do you counterfeit a coin? Well, all you need is a pretty convincing die. You hammer it in, and what do? You coat it in the metal that it's supposed to be, but the inside is some other base metal. If you want to be really advanced about it, what people have done is it's not a lot of it's a lot of precious metal, just not as the full amount of precious metal, and then some other base metals. One of the most upsetting things is in gold bars, big gold bullion, like the big gold bars. We cannot guarantee any gold or silver bar that comes in unless we can cut it in half or melt it down and recast it, because of how often somebody puts something else inside. And yeah, there's a good thick layer of gold or silver on the outside of it. So you think you're fine, but inside there's a tungsten bar or something like that. And the only way to discover that is to melt it down. If you use the spectrometers and the x-rays and a bunch of these other things, they can generally just tell you it looks like the whole exterior of this thing is clearly gold or silver. So it looks pretty good, but it's really, really hard to detect. With a goldback, you don't have any of those problems. Not only can they not hide any other base metal in here, it's too thin. They've got this image, this reverse image on the back. You can see is brought about by vacuum deposition. So when we mint these, they're minted not with the traditional process of stamping or printing something. It's basically like a 3D printer. You could think of it like 3D printing with a laser, where the laser is the nozzle and the filament is pure gold. And then
still call it a minting? Somebody just posted in chat, like it's still called a mint.
It's still called a mint. It's still called a mint. Okay. Technically, to mint coin is to issue it. But it's not all those other processes that people are familiar with are subtractive processes, right? When you stamp a coin, you're subtracting gold until you get the right amount. This is an additive process. And that's what makes it possible for us to be so exact and make such tiny pieces of gold that one goldback is only 1/1000th of a troy ounce, right? 1/1000th of a troy ounce of pure gold. And that 1/1000th of an ounce, like I said, it's like a grain. It's such a small amount. But yeah, what we're doing is basically we're building it up. We start with a clear polymer cover that we print all of the art and designs on, which of course contain all of the anti-counterfeiting measures and things like that any paper currency would already have anyway, right? It's some of these security features were designed by the same people who did the security features for the $100 bill. So that's almost impossible to counterfeit on its own. But it's just a clear piece of polymer that you can see right through with just a little bit of printing on it. Then that goes into a machine. Actually, I think it goes in this way. And then we start printing on it with this laser. It creates kind of a spray. It's not one atom at a time because we use more than one laser. But we're basically printing it one atom at a time per laser. There's a stream of gold atoms that then get bombarded onto this surface. And as they get bombarded onto the surface, they build up. And so if you can look at a goldback under a microscope, and sometimes you can do this even just with a magnifying glass app on your phone if you've got the right lens, if it's one of the newer smartphones, you zoom in on the back of a goldback sometime, and you will see that it's built up into these shapes, including the anti-counterfeiting measures embedded in the gold itself at an atomic level. Nobody else has the technology to do that. That is a proprietary and patented technology. There's even a patent number on all of the 2022 goldbacks. Nobody else can do that. Nobody else can do that process. And so we believe that it really is the most secure form of money in the world today. It's a lot easier to counterfeit U.S. currency than it is to counterfeit a goldback.
You touched on fiat. I just want to bring that up again. What exactly is fiat? The U.S. dollar is just a promise, right? Broken promise.
Well, it used to be a promise for precious metals. Now it's a promise for nothing in particular. So it used to be that your dollar bill would say silver certificate at the top, and at the bottom it would say $1 payable to the bearer on demand. In other words, the dollar bill wasn't the dollar. It was just a receipt for the dollar. The dollar was made out of silver. The same thing with the old gold certificates, which they would call
it was a note that represented that you had access to silver. And the same with the gold. Right. They said gold reserve note. You could exchange it for gold on demand.
Mm-hmm. But in 1971, Richard Nixon said that they were temporarily suspending the convertibility of the dollar for gold and silver. Well, only for silver at the time. And, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. Have you ever noticed that? But that temporary suspension continues, obviously, to today. And they can never bring it back. It's impossible. And so at that point in 1971, they started printing them. Instead of saying silver certificate or gold certificate, it would just say Federal Reserve note. And so it's sort of like, I like to compare it to a coupon. The Federal Reserve note is still a coupon, just like the old silver certificate was a coupon. But the silver certificate was a coupon that you could redeem and get real money for. And the current Federal Reserve note is a coupon, but it's a coupon you can never actually redeem. It's a coupon that expired in 19.
It's a promise. It's a promise from government. Everybody knows what that's worth.
Well, right, but it's a promise for what? Actually, if you go to one of my favorite things to recommend is Mike Maloney's The Hidden Secrets of Money. It's a promise for what exactly? It's not exactly. So what it is it's a debt instrument. If you want to really get down to the brass tacks on what it means, is that it's saying that the government has created a debt, and that if you have enough of these certificates, your portion of the debt you can escape from that portion of the debt. But this is one of the reasons why things like the national deficit can never be paid off. It's one of the reasons why they're really, really nervous about either forgiving student loans or reinstating student loans, which have been suspended temporarily again since COVID. They're really, really nervous about bringing that back. In either way, either solution, because they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't when it comes to the monetary supply. Why? Because every time you pay back to the Federal Reserve some of the portion of that money, you actually destroy liquidity. The money that we're exchanging are debt instruments, meaning that if you ever pay off that debt, the money ceases to exist. The money only exists as a debt to government. And so here's a good example for you.
So you're saying they can't pay off the debt.
They can't.
Like, I understand that they won't. I understand that they won't.
There would be no such thing as the dollar if they were to ever pay it off.
So it's not even a promise. It's not even a promise.
It's a debt.
Promise.
A great example of this was the 2008 crisis. I think it was still Bush at the time was saying in 2007, we need to buy up these mortgage-backed securities. Well, a lot of people who love freedom or want to have reasonable government, they'd say, well, wait a second. Why would we give a bunch of money to Wall Street to pay off, to buy up mortgage-backed securities? Why not literally take less money? It would cost the government less to just pay off those mortgages. But the government was like, no, we're not going to do that. Why? Why wouldn't they just pay off the mortgages and let everyone own their own house? You'd think that'd be cheaper. Believe me, it'd be a lot more popular with most Americans, right? Hey, my mortgage is gone. That'd be great. Here's the reason, but that's the reason why they could not do that. It wasn't just that they didn't want to. It was that they literally could not do that without revolutionizing the entire monetary system, because those mortgages, that debt is the dollar. If they were to have paid off all the mortgages, they would have destroyed the liquidity of the dollar to such an extent it couldn't function as a currency. Because that's what the currency is. We're trading pieces of our future when we're trading dollars. So it's all about whether or not we continue to service that debt. And if that debt ever ceased to exist and the servicing on that debt ever ceased to exist, the dollar itself would cease to exist and it would just be paper again.
So the debt will continue to grow. And
it will.
It has to continue to grow.
It has
until the system collapses, right? At some point it collapses. That the interest payment on the debt will cause it to collapse.
And that's really the problem with all fiat currencies, is that eventually they reach a point where creating debt isn't enough to solve the debt problem. You can't just always pay debts with new debts, right? Because you think you can. At first, it doesn't seem that unreasonable. I'm just going to pay this $5,000 credit card off with this new $5,000 credit limit card, and I'll just keep passing it down the road. And that's what the Federal Reserve is doing. They're just passing it on. The problem is every time you do that, you still have to continue to pay the interest, and you still have to continue to pay inflation. Eventually, that interest and that inflation, the service on that debt, catches up with your ability to refinance it, with raising that debt ceiling, for example. And eventually, you can no longer service it. At that point, you have runaway inflation, and you end up like the Weimar Republic with their millions of Deutschmark notes, or you end up with
wheelbarrow loads to buy a loaf of bread.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a graph, Beverly. If you want to pick up the graph of the U.S. dollar, the value, like you mentioned the Federal Reserve, so they're the monopoly on money that's in, and ever since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the value of the dollar has basically crashed.
Right, and that's what they're doing, is they're servicing that debt, and as they pay the treasury bonds, as they print more money in order to spend more money, every time they do that, it increases the amount of dollars in circulation and decreases their value. Now, there's a few offsets to this. To be fair to the Keynesian economics people, they say, well, as you increase economic output, as you create more goods and services, you actually offset to some extent the inflation of the monetary supply. And that's there's some truth to it, but it's never going to be enough because the dollar is untethered from those goods and services in any direct way. They're not because it's not backed up by anything real. The real value of our economy and the monetary supply of the dollar it's just not linked enough, I think, for their economic system to work. And this is why the school of Austrian economics is usually preferred by people who love freedom, people who love free markets, because that's
people who actually understand economics, I would call it. It's people who actually know what economics is.
Right.
And the chart. So the chart we just had up.
One of those schools is forgetting that theory has to be linked to reality, and Austrian economics recognizes no, theory is just a way of trying to describe reality, and they have to be linked. You can't just have pure theory with no reality and assume it's going to work.
So the chart I had up for a little while, I don't know if you could see that, but it showed the value of the U.S. dollar. It goes all the way back to 1635, which is interesting that they even count that. But from 1776, 1787, it bounces around a little, but it's basically stable up until the Federal Reserve was created. It goes up and down some, but
the big bump is basically about trade in silver to China. Historically speaking, in the late 16 and early 1700s, it drove up demand for silver dramatically, and the dollar was originally a certain number of grains of silver. That's a measurement system,
and that's that 1700s. The bigger bump.
That's that bigger bump.
Times
is that, and that was basically the beginning of global trade, and so it created this economic boom. But then after that, these other ups and downs are usually it's about wars. Suddenly there's scarcity created by war, and so people will trade their silver for much less because they just need to eat. They just need to survive the war, that kind of thing. And then it bumps up in times of better trade. But then once you get to 1970s. It really drops off because that's when silver became completely untethered from money, and money could just completely go on its own way. Now, the monetary supply chart, if you can find it, because the Fed stopped publishing it in 2000, or was it? No, it was 2020. They stopped publishing it in 2020. That chart is terrifying because it shows how the supply of the dollar goes up a little bit at a time, and sometimes there's little jumps. But then with the COVID spending, with a bunch of those big changes, they created a bunch of new dollars out of nowhere, and the chart just takes off. And so a lot of people are saying, "Oh my goodness, that means we're getting really close to potentially runaway inflation in the dollar." Now, maybe we can put that off again, but the danger is that theoretically, at least, all we can do is kick the can down the road, or do something different. We cannot fix the dollar without abolishing the dollar. So that
chart appears to show the dollar is abolishing itself, or
basically
DC is abolishing the dollar. You have to zoom in to see that it's not zero now. It's just asymptotically.
It's not zero. It's just
zero,
dramatically lower.
It'll never actually get to zero, but it's just going to drop and drop and drop.
Yeah, here's a math joke for those who are fairly nerdy about this. An infinite number of mathematicians walk into a bar. And the first one says, "I want a pint of beer." And the second one says, "I want half a pint of beer." And the third one says, "I want a quarter of a pint of beer." And the next one says, "I want an eighth of a pint of beer." And the bartender says, "Stop right there." He pours 2 pints of beer and says, "You have to know your limits." Now
that's a really nerdy math joke.
That's a really nerdy math joke.
Calculus.
So the idea is the concept of limits is that a half of a half of a half. You'll always still have something. But eventually it will reach a point where it's insignificant, and it will never exceed a certain limit. So that's basically where the dollar is headed. We might get to the point where $1 million will only buy you a gallon of milk, or $10 million will buy you a gallon of milk, or $100 million will buy you a gallon of milk, but it'll always still have some value, at least in theory. Now, I want to bring this back to the Goldback. What's the difference then? Why do we care about this? It's because if we really want to have liberty, if we really want to have freedom, we have to have a free market. And if we're going to have a free market, we have to have a market that works where theory and reality are linked, where you actually have your rights to property, where you actually have real value exchanged for real value. And the only way that you can do that, that we're aware of, really, is to link it to reality. And frankly, as much as I love cryptocurrencies, I own a bunch myself. I believe that the technology that they're based on has great power to replace all kinds of bureaucratic institutions and bring accountability and transparency to a lot of our systems. The problem is it's still not linked to reality in the same way because it doesn't physically exist. Goldbacks do. And so what it comes down to is that at Goldback, we believe that we can bring back the gold standard. We can bring back Austrian economics. We can create a free market that cannot be manipulated, so that your money can't be confiscated, so that you can truly have freedom in your property. And it's fairly simple. 3 steps. 1, you have to understand the problem. We just went over that. If you understand the problem, you understand that reality and theory have to work together, and that's not happening right now. Not in the dollar, not in most anywhere in our system. Second, you have to actually get some goldbacks. Well, I've checked that off the list for me, and you mentioned earlier you got a bunch of goldbacks yourself, Keith, right?
So, I haven't tried using them in Florida yet. I did use them in New Hampshire. So how are they're used in New Hampshire, because you have the New Hampshire one, and
sure.
I used them a lot at PorkFest. Everybody knew what they were there.
Sure.
But how is it moving into the States? Like how much is it being used?
Well, that's kind of what I'm doing right now. Is I'm traveling around Wyoming and helping to educate people and get them to adopt it across the state of Wyoming. And I would say that probably holding them as a inflation hedge and just hoarding them to a certain extent is probably the majority of what's happening with the goldbacks that have been minted so far. But there is definitely a percentage of businesses that are accepting them and people who are spending them. And that's really the third step, right? Understand the problem, get yourself some alternative currency like the goldback. The third step is you have to actually spend them. They have to circulate in order to bring back the gold standard. And
I intend to use the ones I have. I haven't tried yet in Florida.
Yeah.
But New Hampshire wasn't hard.
You should go for it.
They were.
Yeah, in New Hampshire, there's over 100 businesses that'll accept them right at the cash register. In Utah, there's like 300 businesses where you can just spend them just like you would any other cash. Go up to the cash register and just go for it. If you want to bring up the website again, there's actually a little calculator app on there that I recommend that people use.
Bring up the goldback.com website.
Yep. And then a calculator you're going to see is right on the top. You can click on calculator and it'll bring up a calculator and it'll do that exchange rate for you so that you don't have to worry about doing the math essentially yourself.
Oh, you can see what
it's a very simple process. You put in the amount due at the top. It shows you the exchange rate of the day. It tells you how many goldbacks they have to pay to cover that amount. And then how many were actually paid by the customer. Maybe they do a split transaction. They only pay you a portion. Or maybe they don't have 6 ones or a 5 and a 1. They've got a 10. So they overpay you. And then it'll show you how to do change as well.
They do change in fiat currency.
Correct. You can do
because they don't have
smaller than 1 goldback, then you can do it in fiat currency.
Exactly. At PorkFest, like the smallest thing I bought a glass of wine walking around. I was walking around and somebody selling wine in the evening. So you want a glass? Okay. All I have is goldbacks. He goes, I take goldbacks. So I gave him a 1 and I only wanted 1 glass. And now this is PorkFest. And he said, do you want fiat change? And I'm like, not really. So he gave me 2 9mm shells. He said, do you have a 9mm? Yeah. He gave me 2 shells. So, okay, nice. Well, that's real money too. That's precious metals.
In many ways, it really is. The biggest problem is it's not quite as durable because it can kind of expire eventually. And it's also not as portable. Portability is one of the other functions of money. Carrying around an ammo can is heavier. It's heavier. I mean, if you've ever had to lug around ammo cans, you'll find out it's a lot heavier than your wallet.
Yes. It's not useful, but as change, I was kind of joking. I thought it was funny. I was like, sure, that's pretty good. So when you touched on the state thing, I'm curious about why printing it within a state gets around something at the federal level? Why having the
Right.
state-specific goldback?
The federal government has more or less delegated its federal responsibility to coin money to the Federal Reserve. And so the federal government doesn't really want competition. They don't want there to be a new dollar. Some people will be familiar with a failed experiment when they tried to create something called the Liberty Dollar, which is essentially an attempt to bring back the silver standard privately in the dollar. And one of the biggest problems is that, well, for one thing, it was a dollar. It wasn't a separate currency system like Bitcoin is, or like Goldback is, or like, the euro or the peso. They called it the dollar. And
that's
they were
competition. Government hates competition.
They were in direct competition. We're not, as much as I recognize that some people might think that what I've said about the Federal Reserve isn't particularly complimentary. We're not in direct competition with the Federal Reserve.
This is a show where you can just scream out "End the Fed" anytime you want.
Right? audit at least, right?
That's the first step. I think most people understand now. We should just end it. And looking at the chart of what happened since then,
the value of the dollar, yeah.
And so when you make them state specific, you're getting around the monopoly that the Federal Reserve and the federal government has.
In many cases, in fact, the Goldback is basically sponsored by the state to a certain extent. For example, one of the reasons why I'm so excited to launch the Wyoming Goldback next month on the 19th of September, and one of the reasons why we're pushing it so hard, is that Wyoming has very, very friendly laws. I don't remember exactly when. It might have been about 18 months ago. Wyoming passed the Wyoming Legal Tender Act, making gold legal tender of the state and untaxable. So that, the change in value of gold or silver cannot be taxed, and a bunch of different things like that. And that very, very friendly state law means that if what we're doing is under the constitutional authority of a state, and we're circulating it locally as a local currency, which is also a recognized thing you can do legally, then we're not in competition with the feds. We're doing something under the state's authority, under the state's direction to a certain extent, because what we're trying to do is meet the need that law opens up the gate for. Then essentially we're protected by the states. If the Goldback project gets bigger, and frankly right now, it's tens of millions of dollars worth of Goldbacks that are out there. I think we're getting close to 10 million Goldbacks in circulation. I bet you we've passed it, actually. We won't know exactly when we've passed it, but we're really close to that. I think we should be celebrating that. 10 million Goldbacks. So, maybe a little less than $40 million worth in circulation. That might sound like a lot. It is a lot for a local currency project. I think we are the largest local currency project that's ever been attempted. But we're still really small potatoes, frankly, compared to the Federal Reserve System. Right.
It has to grow, and it's going to grow organically. Is the only way this will grow. And they haven't really come after you yet.
Yeah, and so I just don't think we're even on the radar yet. We're not threatening their hegemony, and we're not counterfeiting or copying their designs, and we're not trying to pass this off as though this is a dollar. This is not a dollar. Every bill says on it, and this is also for legal reasons, not U.S. dollar legal tender. So it's a specie legal tender instrument. According to the state laws, this is specie legal tender. But it's not U.S. dollar legal tender, because this is not a dollar. It's a Goldback.
It's not a dollar, but it's gold.
It's its own currency, separate currency.
And I often do a quote from my Constitution on this show. So, it says, Article 1, Section 10, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debt. So why wouldn't it be difficult for the federal government to come after somebody using basically gold and silver coin as a tender in favor of debt? That's the only thing they are allowed to use. Exactly. I would say you're not allowed to use the paper dollar.
Exactly. So states can't issue their own fiat currencies, but states can issue silver and gold legal currencies.
So the state government could actually adopt.
That's the exception.
A state government under that constitutional provision could adopt the Goldback as its official payment of debt within that state.
Correct.
Federal government couldn't stop that
Mhm.
constitutionally. They might try anyway. They
And
might
if
send
there's
bombers to the Capitol.
if there's any state treasurers listening, I think that would be a really fun project. Would be to say, okay, let's make it official. Let's put the state treasurer's signature and the state seal on each bill or something like that. That would be fun. Right now, no state has decided to sponsor it to that extent. But, nothing's impossible. I think the problem is, of course, we need to have enough of it to really meet the needs of that economy. And right now, all we're really trying to do is build local business networks. Frankly, people ask me, what do I do, right? I'm an attorney, but I'm also marketing, but I'm also on podcasts. What's my job? I feel like my job is really to organize communities, to build free markets, to create business networks in a really grassroots way. What we're doing is we are saving small business America one business at a time by circulating real sound money. That's what we're doing. And so I'm kind of more of an activist than anything else.
Yeah, you're an activist for a sound money system.
Yeah.
And having the Goldback be, you said it's a thousandth of a troy ounce, so it's defined in gold. It has nothing to do with the U.S. dollar standard.
Right. Now, the U.S. Mint does mint gold coins. One of the other fun things for those who are a bit wonky about this is that the 2022 has some new language on it. The bottom of each Goldback, under the 1/1000th of a troy ounce, it says exchangeable by Goldback Inc. in U.S. gold coin to bearer on demand. In other words, this is not only a gold coin because it's made out of gold, it's also a bearer note. So that is other legal ways that we're protecting this, is that the U.S. government creates gold coin, and this is not only made out of gold, it's also backed up by gold in the vault. So we're doing both at the same time. And that means that the U.S. Mint would have to dramatically change its rules. It would mean that the state laws would have to be challenged. It would mean a lot of things would have to change in order to make any of this illegal. Right now, we've been very, very cautious to try to make sure that everything we're doing at Goldback is fully compliant with the law and isn't a direct competitor with the Federal Reserve System or any of that. Because what we really want to do is we just want to strengthen our local businesses. We don't want to create trouble. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're not creating trouble by using gold. If you try to fake a dollar, they can't claim you're counterfeiting a dollar.
Because it's not a dollar.
How would the federal government go after Goldback if they wanted to try to stop it? Say you get as big as Bitcoin, and now they're going to try to claim it's a commodity.
Right. Now, if you go onto our website, you can read some legal analysis about this. What we've tried to do is we tried to go through all of the case law about local currency systems and the Liberty Dollar problems, and tried to make sure that we were not only compliant with the law and the rulings, but we wanted to make sure we weren't even violating any of the things that the government even complained about, even the things they didn't win in court. We wanted to make sure that every argument that had ever been made, we weren't violating them. And that went down even into the design. Each Goldback represents a virtue. So it's female artists drawing female figures that are symbolic. So it's not dead presidents. They're vertically oriented instead of horizontally oriented. They make it clear that they're not a dollar. They don't have any government imagery, things like that. We wanted to make it abundantly clear that we weren't going to violate any of those rules or even requests. Now, here's one of the other things I want to mention.
Anything like a dollar. It's not even the same size exactly.
It's not even the same size. Now, that is one of the fun things about the different sizes, right? The 5 is bigger than the 1, 10, 25, 50. Yeah. They go up in size. That's handy because it's more gold, but it's also just thicker. It's not just bigger, it's thicker for more gold. But the other thing is that there's a fun history to that. The one Goldback is the same size as some of the continental dollars that were used at the time, like during the time of the Revolution. Money was the size of the 1. The 5 and the 10 are then proportionally larger in between The size of the 25 is the size of the Federal Reserve note to make sure that it'll fit in your wallet.
That's the same.
But one of the funnest ones is the 50 is the same size as in the 1920s and 30s or so. There was a bill called the Goldback, colloquially. It was the gold certificate. And the 50 is the size of the old gold certificate. A lot of cashier's checks are also made this size now. A lot of checks are made this size now. And then the idea was that will fit in any executive style or checkbook style wallet now. And so that's one of the reasons for the sizes. You know, one of the other things I want to mention is that goldbacks can be exchanged for fresh ones. Let's say you get a really beat up goldback. It starts coming apart or it's just looking terrible. We exchange them for fresh ones. Okay, so we want it to be clear that you're never going to lose your money on a goldback. The gold is safely encased inside. If that ever comes into question, trade it into us before you lose any of the gold, if you can, and we will trade you for a brand new one so that you'll always have your gold holdings.
So somebody asked a question in chat. I don't understand the question, but maybe you do. Do you believe the Wizard of Oz being an allegory for money systems and 1890 disputes over monetary policy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely it was. I don't think that's disputed. That's an interesting point. Most people think of the Wizard of Oz as just this odd little fantasy, and it was mostly famous because it was the first movie to transition from black and white to color, so that everyone in the audience who was used to watching black and white movies was totally at ease with watching Kansas in black and white. It was normal. And then all of a sudden they go to Oz and boom, color. And they're like, oh my goodness, I've never seen anything so vibrant, so beautiful. You know what I mean? And so that became a famous movie. But yeah, the book itself is a critique of banks, which it called the Wicked Witches. The banks of the East and the West were the Wicked Witch of the East and the West. And the belief was that the ordinary people going to the Oz, the OZ, the ounce, which is the abbreviation for the ounce, if we could follow the yellow brick road, if we could follow the use of gold as money to its logical conclusion, we would find that there's a wizard, that there's a magic in using the ounce, in using precious metals. And that magic should have the power to defeat the Wicked Witch of the East and the West, to defeat the major banking cartels, the major banking systems. But that it wasn't just the gold that would save us. It was the common people. It was the regular American people, because after all, what is America? It is we, the people. If they rose up, they could overcome the
monopoly on money,
the wicked evil magic of the banks. You know.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch that now that I know a little bit about Austrian economics and the money system.
And so it's little
I just thought it
Dorothy
was
from
a fun
Kansas.
kids show.
It's little Dorothy from Kansas, from the heartland of America, who ends up defeating the Wicked Witches because there's no substance to them. They're weak. There's something as simple as a house will crush them. Something as simple as splash them with water will make them just melt away because they have no substance. And that once the American people realize that, they would realize that they always had the power to go home.
Okay, so the answer to your question, the loquacious, I forgot the name, loquacious something. The answer to your question is yes. I didn't understand.
Yes, I'm aware of this interesting
announcement. I'm glad Benjamin understood the question. I had another question for you that you may have already answered it, but somebody else asked it way better than me in a discussion where he's trying to understand what gold was. So Beverly, if you want to show that video, and we'll ask Benjamin the same question if she's ready. I might have surprised her because I told her it would be towards the end.
Yeah, no problem. Uh-oh, Ben Bernanke.
This cracks me up every time.
And to the extent that the last few years have made people more worried about the potential of a major crisis than they have gold as a protection.
Do you think gold is money?
No.
It's not money. Even if it had been money for 6,000 years, somebody reversed that and eliminated that economic law.
Well, it's an asset. I mean, it's the same. Would you say treasury bills are money? I don't think they're money.
I knew about this, but
It's
I
Ron
never
Paul.
watched it. The look on his, Ron Paul is awesome. So he was chairman of the House Financial Committee at the time. And I watched the whole video this morning. So the context is Ron Paul is asking him about they're printing money like crazy. And he's pointing out like what you're doing, you're destroying the value of the dollar. Like Ron Paul understands Austrian economics. Ben Bernanke is arguing Keynesian, right? And Ron's like, don't you know what you're doing? So then he starts asking about gold. Do you care about the price of gold? Bernanke's like, well, like he doesn't really. And they go back and forth for a few minutes, and Ron Paul starts getting confused. And then you can see like Ron Paul finally realizes the problem. And he says, do you think gold is money? And Ben Bernanke like just goes blank, like, and then he finally just says no. Like that is actually what money is to him.
Because the thing is he has to. If he were to say yes, which I think he wanted to originally, well, yeah, I mean, I guess it is. But the moment the Federal Reserve Chairman admits that, oh, the game is up. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? And so he has to say no. So he pauses for a minute and he's like, yeah, you're trying to get me. You're trying to trick me here. No.
And he says no.
Because obviously for thousands of years, gold has been the primary form of money. It always has been. Almost every theorist who's ever written about money meant precious metals throughout all of history. But if he were to say yes, he opens Pandora's box on his whole enterprise, and the whole thing could come crashing down around his ears. Because the moment that your average American like Dorothy from the heartland of America realizes that this is just a piece of paper and that there's no real value here. In fact, it's not even as valuable as a blank piece of paper because you can't even take decent notes on this thing. It's already printed on both sides. Okay. When you realize that this thing is worth less than a blank piece of paper, the game is up.
Intrinsic, as an intrinsic value.
As an intrinsic value.
He has to
because this has a value,
Mhm.
but it only has a value so long as everyone agrees that we're playing this game. This only has a value so long as I can exchange it. And if he says, well, yeah, I guess gold is money, he is simultaneously admitting that the whole enterprise that they're doing is based only on people playing along. He doesn't want to dispel that illusion that most Americans have, that this is real value. The moment he says, well, it doesn't have any intrinsic value, then if too many people know that, it just stops working.
If he had answered yes, it's money, then I guess Ron Paul's next statement could have been, well, obviously we need to end the Fed. Like
exactly. I mean, because that's the next
line
step. And so he has to say no. He has to say no.
And one of the things, I mean, I like Ron Paul for lots of reasons. I voted for him both times he was running for president. But this whole thing, when he started with this Federal Reserve, I don't think I knew what it was or didn't know much about it 30 years ago, whenever he got started on this. He made this pretty popular. Like you can yell "end the Fed" in a bar with a bunch of 30-year-olds now, and everybody's like, yeah, and like everybody knows what that is. Ron Paul kind of did that.
He did.
Were you at the group picture at Porkfest?
I actually wasn't.
Okay, well, I have to tell you what happened. So everybody gets on the hill. There's like 3,000 people, liberty-minded people, and this whole "end the Fed" chant gets started. Like totally sad. I look around like there's 3,000 people. They all know exactly what that means. And they all just start chanting, and they had trouble getting the picture going because everybody's yelling "end the Fed."
Right.
But yeah, 20 years ago that would have never happened.
People who chant that, people who agree, they get that. The problem is how. How do you end the Fed without ending the American economy? We don't want people to stop being productive. We don't want to destroy the Fed. And so at Goldback, we don't really chant "in the Fed." We need the Fed. In fact, generally, we exchange Goldbacks, real money, for Federal Reserve notes, which is fake money. We do that. We sell Goldbacks for dollars all the time. Now, we don't want to stay long in the dollar because we know it's going to lose its value. We know it's not a great measure of value, but we need it. It's a necessary evil, at least at this point, so that we can transition into something better.
There has to be a transition, yes, is all. I mean, I understand transition. I would like to transition to shutting down DC entirely and sending everybody home. But I realize as a practical matter, there has to be a transition there. Right?
The
same with the
practical
Federal
matter.
Reserve.
How do you create such a civic-minded group of people that they don't need laws, but they will not harm one another? Do you know what I mean?
At least not DC. Yeah, I separate not needing laws from not needing DC.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Right. Maybe going to individual state sovereignty or something like that. More local government.
Flex it. Yes,
Oh, okay.
That was one of I did 2 talks at PorcFest. One of them was Secession 101. It's kind of a balanced look at secession. But yeah, that's what I mean. So
but you know, there's a map for.
Go ahead.
There is a map for that transition. You trade these for these, and then you spend these. See, this is one of the biggest problems that there's always been with gold. People will trade dollars for gold. For the privilege of owning that gold, they pay a premium. And then they can't spend the gold. The gold's too valuable. So then they sell the gold for dollars and they spend the dollars again, which means they just opted right back in. Most gold owners who say in the Fed don't realize that they're still playing the game as long as things are denominated in dollars. This is one of my big criticisms of cryptocurrencies. Most cryptocurrencies are denominated in dollar values. Oh, well, what's Bitcoin at today? What's Ethereum at today? What's it at based in dollars? No, as long as you're measuring it in dollars, the dollars still control you. They control how you spend it. They control what you think it's worth. They control your concept of a measure of value, in which case the Fed still controls it. The nice thing is
to look at the other way with gold too. And you say like, it's not what is the value of the gold dollar. It's like, what is the value of the dollar in gold? You think about it backwards, like the trade, it's gold that actually has a value and the dollar is changing. It's a matter of perspective,
right? You're looking at it from one side or the other. The nice thing with the Goldback is you can opt out of the Federal Reserve System and never go back because you turn dollars into Goldbacks and then you spend the Goldbacks. You don't need the dollars anymore.
Yeah, you just need people to switch to it.
Right.
So once enough people switch, then we can do it. So
every single person who's listening to this, who's a business owner, go to goldback.com and give us your business information so that you can join the network of businesses that are using the Goldback. Then people can pay you in Goldbacks. Then maybe you can make your menu or your price list or your catalog. You can denominate it in Goldbacks instead of denominating the values in dollars. And there you go. You probably won't even have to change that change that listing because it doesn't have inflation in the Goldback. Before I worked for the company Goldback, I managed a small law firm. And as managing partner, I signed my law firm up as one of the very first 10 or so businesses that accepted the Goldback as a form of payment right at the very beginning of the project. In fact, we hadn't even printed the other denominations yet. There was only the 1 and the 5. There was no 10, 25, or 50 even minted yet. And I signed up my business and I said, okay, we're going to use Goldbacks as payment. And I made a price list of all the legal services that had a flat fee and as well as my hourly rate, a price list in dollars and in Goldbacks. But I forgot to update it. A year and a half later or so, someone came in and said, well, I'm going to pay you in dollars. There's no way I'm going to pay you in Goldbacks. You're overcharging. And if I pay you in Goldbacks, I got to pay you a lot more money. I said, no. The whole point was when I created the list was that there was a 10% savings if people would pay me in Goldbacks because I wanted the gold. So I'd worked it into my price list that it was cheaper to pay in Goldbacks. And he says it's more expensive. So I went back and looked at it. Sure enough, the dollar had lost about 17% of its value as opposed to the Goldback in that 1 year.
Measured in dollars.
Measured in dollars.
Yeah. And you have to look at it. And it's because they're printing dollars, right? We talked about inflation briefly, but a lot of people look at inflation as the price of consumer goods, but that's not what inflation is. The price of consumer goods is a side effect of increasing the money supply. You can't do that with Goldbacks very easily.
Right. In fact, the only way we could really do that is to bring in gold from, say, an asteroid or another planet. Right now, there's only so much gold in the world. And even if we manufactured every bit of gold in the entire world into Goldbacks, it would still have a large value. It would not.
And over thousands of years, that factor made gold used as money, right? I mean, they use shells and various stick things, and like they settle on gold because of this.
Right, because of this. It's useful, it's beautiful, it's scarce, and so it has a bunch of properties that make it an ideal money for its use as money.
So even
other metals just don't have.
Even if the Federal Reserve Chairman can't admit it, gold is money.
Right. He can't admit it.
Is the
but
dollar
he knows
money.
it. You could see it in his eyes. You know, when he asked him, "Do you think gold is money?" You could see it in his eyes. He's like, "Well, of course it is, but I can't say that out loud." Okay, no.
Not on C-SPAN. If I said that on C-SPAN, he'd lose his job.
It was fair of him to also say, you know, treasury notes aren't really money either. It's like
he did say that. I thought that was funny.
Well, and actually,
So
in one case, here's a blasphemy for you. A blasphemy even against what I usually say. In some ways, gold is not money. In some ways, gold is not money because it doesn't have the fungibility. It's not as useful for making regular purchases, and you can't make change with it.
Oh.
But you can with goldbacks. So even if gold isn't money fully, goldbacks are.
And it's based on gold. Because you look at it as based on gold.
Yep.
And it's not a promise. It's not a promissory note.
Right. It's not just a promise for gold somewhere else in the vault. It is that too, but it's made out of the gold. It is the gold. It is the value. It's in your pocket. And so when you trade a goldback, like you were saying, you know, you haven't really spent them in Florida yet. When you do, though, I bet that you have a different feeling when you're spending goldbacks than when you're spending other currency. Because you know differently, I think, deep down, almost viscerally, that you're exchanging something of real value for something else of real value. And so you have to make these decisions differently. There's a gamification of money. When it's all digital, when it's all just on your phone, it's just numbers. It's like a game that you're playing. But when you exchange something of real value for something else of real value, you have to be sure that thing is worth it to you, right? And so you spend differently. It's a different mindset.
That's true. All right, so we've been going for an hour here now, so I think we should close this down. But you want to tell people how to follow you and how to follow Goldbacks?
Absolutely. So just the word Goldback, one word. Gold and then back, Goldback. If you just search that in any search bar, you're going to find a bunch of stuff. We've got a YouTube channel, we've got Twitter and TikTok and all those things like that, right? And of course, goldback.com is a great place to get info. Now, where to get actual physical goldbacks into your hot little hands? First of all, you're going to want to talk to all of your local gold dealers. Most of them carry it. Online. Excuse me. Online, there's a lot of different gold sellers. All the major bullion houses pretty much in the world sell goldbacks now. There's even some quasi-banking-like services you can get, such as accounts denominated in goldbacks, as well as a preferred rate to buy goldbacks at a very, very advantageous rate. If you become a member of the United Precious Metals Association, you can find them at upma.org. The United Precious Metals Association. But there's tons of online sellers that'll send you goldbacks to anywhere in the world, like Defy the Grid and Finest Known or Jam Bullion or any of these major bullion houses. There's actually a guide to getting goldbacks on our website that lists these and many other excellent gold dealers or currency exchanges. But really, what I want you to do once you get them in your hand is don't just hold on to them. You got to spend them. You got to go out there and go to your local grocer, especially if it's a locally owned business. You know, some high school kid, some clerk isn't going to know what to do. But if you can talk to the owner of a business and say, hey, would you take payment in gold? Or one of my other favorite questions is, would you like that in gold or paper?
Yeah.
It's easy to ask. It's easy to think about. And it juxtaposes it well. Gets people to think, wait, why do I want paper? Maybe I do want gold. Get out there and just do that. Keep some in your wallet. And when you do, pretty soon, more and more people will adopt it. And then maybe you can exchange it right at your grocery store.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, so thanks for joining, and we'll have you on again. I want to get into some Constitution questions. So I can think of a dozen Constitution questions I'd love to ask you, and maybe each one will take a half hour to go through.
Maybe.
So
Here's
we'll have you on again.
Here's a very short taster. Life, liberty, and property. It says
Life,
right in the,
liberty, and property.
life, liberty, and property. If you understand that these rights are inextricably linked and that each one is specifically addressed in our founding documents, then you begin to understand the philosophy of the founders and why they felt that protecting these rights was essential to ordered liberty. And as how the Constitution does.
As a teaser for those listening, we chatted for a little while at PorkFest, and we very quickly got into whether owning an F-16 is covered by the Second Amendment, and the Constitution does not allow a standing army in any way at all.
Oh yes, that's probably the most controversial of the constitutional opinions I have, which is that the Second Amendment makes it pretty clear that the only thing that's allowed is well-regulated militias, which is a state level, not a federal level military. So,
we'll leave
that ship sailed a long time ago, but
we'll leave that as a teaser. I think that's an excellent civics topic for a whole episode. Why a standing army is illegal. So maybe that's what we'll call the first one. We'll do that in a couple of months.
All right.
So, all right. Thanks for joining, Benjamin. And go ahead, Beverly, with the end credits.
Thanks.
Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production may increase your carbon footprint. Please eat the bugs to offset your impact. Association with the following co-conspirators will result in a fine of 150 ESG points. I think we can agree that the FBI's track record speaks for itself. Experts agree that 87,000 new tax collectors will make inflation feel like less of a problem. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.